All right, welcome into Starting Five here in the Five Reasons YouTube channel. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick. And at Five Reasons Sports, I'll find the camera eventually. Our producer today is Manny Chang. Our sponsor is Prize Picks. Use the code 5, FIVE. Get that initial deposit matched up to $100. It still works for us. It still works in the state of Florida and many other states. Again, use the code 5, FIVE. You'll get that initial match. You don't have to put down 100, but they'll give you as much as you put down, from 10 up to 100, and then you can play it then or you can play it later. It's up to you. Just make sure you're using the code 5, FIVE. All right, we come to you. We're going to do a quick episode today. Make sure you check out all the other content on the channel. Alex Toledo was in the Minnesota Timberwolves locker room last night. He got stuff from Mike Conley, Anthony Edwards, who else? Karl Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert. And I put up some clips from the Heat locker room as well. As the Miami Heat lose to the Minnesota Timberwolves on the night that they get back Tyler Hero and Bam Adebayo, and both play well. And I know that some fans are going to look at that in a discouraging fashion. And again, we're not trying to sunshine pump you here. We've been pretty honest about what this team is and isn't so far this season. What they are not is a very good fourth quarter team. And the numbers are staggering. Like through the first three quarters this year, they're one of the best teams in the league. I talked to Josh Richardson about that last night, and they don't really understand it. Now, some of it, again, could be attributable. This is reasons, 5 reasons, not excuses necessarily, but it could be attributable to players in and out, getting a feel for themselves in each other. But if they're able to do certain things through the first three quarters, they should be able to do them in the fourth as well. And last night I thought the closing lineup was interesting. No Jaime Jaquez in it. We're going to have these nightly discussions now because they have more players to close with than they have previously had in pretty much any season that I can remember, going all the way back to the Big Three. Like, they have 8 or 9 players who can close. And we know that Jimmy and Bam and likely Tyler are going to be 3 of them, but the other 2 are going to be variable. And last night it was Josh Richardson for the most part in there, a little bit of Duncan Robinson, no Jaime Jaquez in the last few minutes, no Haywood Highsmith, who's been working his way back in, no Caleb Martin either. And Kevin Love was kind of in and out also. He got a couple of minutes late, and I know I'm missing someone off the top of my head here, so it's going to drive me absolutely insane. But essentially, they didn't close because they couldn't defend at the end, and that has been a consistent problem so far this season. And a lot of it's been point of attack. But last night, obviously, they were facing a bigger team, and Anthony Edwards is really good. And they ran into that problem. But on the other end, Minnesota is the number 1 defensive team in the league, and it didn't look like it in the first half. Miami moved the ball. They played with purpose. All kinds of different combinations were working. We got to see a lot of the lineups that Erik Spoelstra would like to use this season. And, we saw Bam out there with the second group. We saw Tyler out there a little bit with the second group. We saw Tyler and Jimmy come back in together, which is not something that Spoelstra was doing earlier this season. We saw some of those reps with Hero and Jaquez that we wanted to see. But ultimately, at the end of the game, and again, I apologize, it was Duncan who was the 5th guy in there at the end. Ultimately, at the end of the game, they didn't get the kind of shots you would want to get, and that culminated with Jimmy Butler taking just a horrific 3. And look, I understand you got to live with Jimmy and die with Jimmy stuff, and he just made a game winner. But look at the difference between the game winner he made and the one he took last night. The game winner he made, he was set, he was balanced. That's his spot, okay? To the point that when Kyle Lowry passed it to him, after Jimmy got the ball, Kyle put his hands up. He knew that was in, because we've seen Jimmy's made that exact shot before, okay? He made a couple of those as game winners, one when he was in Philadelphia and one when he was in Chicago. The shot he took last night, I've never seen him make that shot, ever. And, I understand it was a broken play, but to take that so early in the shot clock, when you had Josh on the floor, who was shooting the 3 well, which was the reason he was in there, actually, because some of the ball handling was a little bit of an adventure, as it can be with him late in games. And you had Duncan out there, and you had Tyler out there. Jimmy's not the guy to take that 3. Like, this is not a situation of no options. And I think that's one of the things we're going to get into today as we talk on the podcast, and Greg was on the podcast last night with Brian and Sean, is they have more options now. And now the idea is figuring out which options to go to when. This is not a team without talent. Like, Heat fans are like, they need this and they need that. Okay, you can always argue that a team needs more, and maybe they need a third superstar, or superstar, borderline superstar player. We can argue what Tyler can become, or maybe ultimately what Hawkins can become. So I get that, and I understand that fans want transactions. But the roster that's been put together, and J Miami Sports hits on, suppose rotation in the fourth was bad. JJJ should have run point guard in the fourth instead of Jay Rich. It's an interesting point. The roster that's been put together has optionality, and it has good players all over the place. It may not have dominant players, but it has good. Like, there's a lot of like B+ players who can be A players on a given night on this team. And now the issue is, A, how do they play with each other and decide who's going to do what when? And also, of course, and that's the point that J Sports Miami just made, how does Eric Spoelstra use those players? Who does he play when? And you can make an argument that Hawkins should have been in there instead of Jay Rich at the end of the game. We're going to have these discussions. You can make an argument, too, that maybe Duncan should have been out and Caleb should have been in for more defense at the end of the game. We're going to have these discussions. But ultimately, whichever five Spoelstra leans on late in the game, of the 8 or 9 that he has. I mean, he could have, look, if Lowry was available last night, he might have been an option. Who knows? Okay. But he's got 9 guys, okay, that he can play in the closing situations. Whichever guys are out there have to make the right decisions. And your best player, and Jimmy is still their best player, even if Bam was ascending to that. I mean, Jimmy is the one with the bullseye on his back still. Okay. Bam is getting there. And at certain points early this season was there. But you're still counting on Jimmy to make those kind of veteran decisions. And that was a terrible decision. And so for everybody who's critical of Tyler and he was going to gum up the offense, I didn't see any of that last night. I mean, to me, he was playing completely on the flow. Like, what he was doing early in the game. In fact, I was sitting with Brady and Alex, and we were all saying, like, he looks like he's trying not to he's intentionally trying not to gum up the offense. There were situations in the first quarter where he got into the paint. He was getting into the paint easily. We know what he's going to do against drop, okay? Because he loves that floater. Minnesota plays drop. This is a perfect team for him to come back against. I think it was intentional, actually, okay? But he gets in the paint a couple of times. He could have made a play or taken a shot. He didn't. But then it was like, okay, he took one floater, and then there was another, and there was another, and he made all of them. And I thought his off-ball defense was really good last night, too. Like, Tyler Hero, we joke about it, and I was the one who kind of came up with this stat, and Tyler knows I did, and all that they tend to lose when he scores a lot, okay? But, again, correlation is not causation. Did I get it right this time? He was not the reason they lost last night. He was one of the reasons they got up. Jimmy wasn't good enough again. I mean, like, we're going to keep coming back to that on the nights that they lose. And I know he doesn't have to score 28 every night. Okay, I understand that. But he was stuck on 15 a long time. And I'll say this, too, that Spoelstra's decision to bring him back, regardless of how he's playing, to bring him back so late, I didn't like that. Once it gets sub 6 minutes, he should be in the game already. Okay, and there were a couple of timeouts where he was sitting there at the scores table, and it's just like we're counting down the seconds. Going small with Jimmy at the 4 forced Jay Rich to guard, Edwards, and he got destroyed in that matchup. Yeah, and that's one of the things, Robbie, that I've noticed about Jay Rich. And again, I'm a big Jay Rich supporter. He drives me insane sometimes with some of the ball handling decisions and where is he going exactly. But the perimeter defense has not been what I remembered. It's not been as consistently good. And Anthony Edwards is going to tear a lot of guys up. Okay, that's just, I mean, look, we talk about what a good defender Highsmith is, and we watch Tyrese Halliburton just maul him. Okay, like elite players. We're talking about, Edwards, Halliburton. There's a reason they're the faces of their franchises now. But he wasn't good defensively. They didn't give him enough help. And you're right. You end up in that situation where, with Jimmy playing at the 4, you're stuck with that. I probably would have put Caleb back in the game, I think, for a little bit more length there. And so probably my choice would have been to take Jay Rich out and put Caleb in. I know some of you are saying Jaquez. Problem with Hawkins is he's going to get calls against him late in the game. I still don't think he's got quite the respect from the officials, so that might have played into Spoelstra's thinking there. And Duncan is the variable now because it's just so hard to take him off the floor. Like when he's playing well, you know he's going to catch fire at some point these days. And I was surprised a little bit that he closed with Hero and Duncan because we've talked about whether or not he would actually do that. He did. I think it worked well in some spots, but yes, it got the matchups all crossed up a little bit. And then, like I said, having Jimmy at the 4 ended up having Josh, guard Anthony Edwards. They're good. Minnesota's good. I think they're legit this time. I still think Gobert is going to be played off the floor in the playoffs, but they're good. And Miami was very competitive with them. That's the positive here. I want to see better decision making in the last 6 minutes, and that starts with a coach. Like, get Jimmy back in the game and let him get a little bit of a lather and a rhythm. I didn't like him kind of forcing him in so late in the game, and then I didn't like the decision making from Jimmy at the end. Ronald says we went from the bad fourth quarter to the bad third quarter last year, now to bad second half. Pretty much. I mean, the third quarter, I will say there's still a plus in the third quarter this year. They are a huge negative in the fourth quarter. Like, this is the worst fourth quarter Heat team I've seen. That's a competitive team. And we can talk about, bad Heat teams, like, the 15-win team, obviously. But I've never seen them be so bad in the fourth. And their defensive rating in the fourth is atrocious. It's not just the offense. And they need to fix that. And like I said, they care about closing. I talk about this all the time. Everybody's always, who's going to start? Who's going to start? Okay, so last night, they went big. I think it was situational. I don't think Love's going to be a consistent starter. To me, what that signaled was that when Lowry is back, which may even be up in Orlando, I'm heading up to Orlando after this episode. When Lowry is back, I can very well see Caleb staying in the starting lineup and everybody just moving up a couple spots. So Caleb essentially goes to the 4 if he's going to say Jimmy stays at the 3 with Tyler and Lowry, and you're back to the same starting lineup that you started last season with. Where you're going Bam, Caleb, Jimmy, Hero, and Lowry, and then you're coming off the bench with your other wings, right? With Jaquez, with Richardson, and with Duncan, obviously, and Highsmith situationally, and Love. Like, that's what this looks like this is headed towards, and I think Spo is setting it up where he kind of has a bigger lineup and a smaller lineup, but I don't really think he cares about the lineup. He and the organization care about the closers. And we are going to have this conversation again because you're going to be like, why wasn't Jaquez in? There'll be some nights you'll be like, why wasn't Richardson in? Why wasn't Lowry in? They couldn't get into offense. Why wasn't Caleb in when they needed a longer defender? Why wasn't Love in when they needed a rebound? We're going to do this all year. But the guys who are going to be in, Jimmy, Bam, and Tyler, they need to make good decisions down the stretch. I had no problems with Bam's decision-making, particularly in his first game back yesterday. He was getting to his spots. He had a couple that swirled out like that really could have changed momentum of the game. I thought Tyler was terrific considering the circumstances. You just need to get good Jimmy every night. Like, that's the thing. Like, because I understand pacing himself. I understand coming off that emotional high. I know you got to get him to the end of the regular season. I know he's probably logged a heavier load than he would have if Tyler and Bam had been healthy. But when the star players come into Miami, they always perform. And we saw that with Anthony Edwards last night. To beat a team like that, you need that guy on your side to play at a really high level and to make the best possible decisions. And he didn't do it last night. So I will say this. I was encouraged by the level they could get to with this group. And I do think that they're going to be encouraged by that. They need to fix the freaking fourth quarter. All right. Thanks to Manny for producing. We will have coverage from Orlando. I'm heading up there. Ronald says, you think Jimmy played better against Minnesota considering his history team? What's funny is he's actually missed 2 of the last visits to Minnesota, and he didn't play well in another game against them. He has typically played well against Chicago and Philadelphia, but not Minnesota for whatever reason. I'm not really sure what that reason is. All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Again, check out all the content on the channel. Make sure you hit like, subscribe, and turn the notifications on. We're going with stuff all day. And we had a big crowd for our Hurricanes show last night as well. So if you're a Hurricanes or Dolphin fan, we got plenty of football content on here. Also, make sure you use the code 5. Have a good day, everybody.